The sun cast its dying rays over the sprawling Colorado prairie, turning the tall grass to rippling gold as Katherine Miller rode her mare along the familiar path leading to her family's ranch. A flash of something unusual caught her eye, a dark shape crumpled in the pasture where nothing should have been. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she tugged on the reins, veering off the trail toward what she now recognized was a man lying motionless in a growing pool of crimson. Katherine swung down from her horse, her boots hitting the ground with a thud. The man was sprawled face down, his broad shoulders and dusty clothes marking him as a cowboy. Blood soaked through his shirt, spreading across his back like a terrible flower blooming. "Sir, can you hear me?" Katherine called, approaching cautiously. The man stirred slightly, a low groan escaping his lips. When she carefully turned him over, his eyes fluttered open, deep blue and clouded with pain. His handsome face was streaked with dirt and blood, a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. "Am I dead?" he whispered, voice raspy. Katherine shook her head firmly, pressing her hands against the wound in his side to stem the bleeding. "You're not dying today," she declared with more confidence than she felt. "I won't let you." The year was 1879, and Durango, Colorado was still finding its footing. The town had sprung up just a year prior, when the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad announced plans to extend their line through the valley. Before that, the area had been largely the domain of the Ute people, miners, and a handful of determined settlers like Katherine's family who had arrived 5 years earlier to raise cattle in the lush valley. As Katherine pressed harder against the man's wound, she studied his face. He couldn't have been more than 30, with strong features and a scar that cut through his right eyebrow. She had never seen him before, which meant he wasn't from Durango. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep him conscious. "Caleb," he managed through gritted teeth. "Caleb Quinn." "Well, Caleb Quinn, I'm Katherine Miller, and I need to get you to our ranch. Do you think you can stand if I help you?" He attempted to nod, but the movement clearly caused him pain. Katherine glanced at her horse, then back at the injured man, calculating. She couldn't leave him here while she went for help. He'd bleed out before she returned. She'd have to get him on the horse somehow. "This is going to hurt," she warned him, tearing a strip from her petticoat to create a temporary bandage. She pressed it against his wound and guided his hand over it. "Hold this tight." Caleb grimaced but complied, and Katherine positioned herself to help him up. With a strength born of years working on her family's ranch, she managed to get him upright. He swayed dangerously, leaning heavily against her smaller frame. "Just a few steps to my horse," she encouraged, feeling the warm stickiness of his blood seeping through her own clothes now. Getting him onto the mare was a struggle that left them both gasping, but somehow Katherine managed it. She climbed up behind him, reaching around his body to take the reins. His head lolled back against her shoulder as she urged the horse forward. "Stay with me, Caleb," she said firmly near his ear. "We're not far from home, and my father and I will patch you up." "Wasn't planning on going anywhere," he mumbled, a hint of wry humor in his pained voice. Katherine guided her mare carefully across the pasture toward the Miller homestead that lay just beyond the next rise. As they crested the hill, the ranch came into view, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings spread across the property. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the afternoon sun glinted off the window panes. "Pa," Katherine called as they approached the house. "Pa, I need help." The front door swung open, and James Miller rushed out, his weathered face creasing with concern as he spotted his daughter with the wounded man. "Good Lord, Katherine, what's happened?" "Found him in the north pasture," she explained breathlessly as her father helped ease Caleb down from the horse. "He's been shot." Together, they half-carried, half-dragged Caleb into the house. Catherine's mother, Eleanor, appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to determination in an instant. "Get him to the spare room," Eleanor directed, already turning to gather supplies. "I'll heat water and bring the medicine box." They laid Caleb on the bed in the small guest room. Catherine's brother Daniel, only 19 but already as tall as their father, appeared in the doorway. "What's going on? Who's that?" he asked, eyes widening at the bloody scene. "Daniel, ride for Dr. Monroe," James instructed. "Tell him it's urgent." As Daniel hurried out, Catherine carefully removed Caleb's blood-soaked shirt to reveal a bullet wound in his left side. It wasn't as deep as she'd feared, but it had torn through enough flesh to cause serious bleeding. "Looks like the bullet went clean through," her father observed. "That's something, at least." Eleanor returned with hot water, clean cloths, and their box of medical supplies. Living far from town had taught the Miller family to handle most injuries themselves, though this was beyond their usual scrapes and cuts. Catherine cleaned the wound while Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering words she couldn't quite catch. Her mother prepared a poultice of herbs known for fighting infection, while her father examined the exit wound on Caleb's back. "Who would do this to you?" Catherine wondered aloud, not really expecting an answer. To her surprise, Caleb's eyes opened, clearer than before. "Men who don't like to lose," he said grimly before wincing as she pressed a clean cloth to his wound. It was nearly an hour before Dr. Monroe arrived with Daniel. By then, they had managed to stop the bleeding, but Caleb's skin was hot to the touch, and Catherine feared infection had already set in. The doctor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands, examined Caleb thoroughly before addressing the family. "You've done well," he told them. "The bullet missed anything vital, but he's lost a good deal of blood, and there's definitely infection starting. He'll need careful nursing for the next few days." "Will he make it?" Catherine asked, suddenly realizing how invested she'd become in this stranger's survival. "Doctor." Monroe nodded slowly. "If fever doesn't take him, yes, but it'll be a close thing." He turned to James. "Do you know who he is?" "Says his name is Caleb Quinn," Catherine answered. "I've never seen him before." "Nor have I," the doctor mused. "Though that's not unusual with new folks coming to Durango every week since the railroad announcement." Dr. Monroe left them with instructions and medicines, promising to return the following day. As night fell, Catherine volunteered to take the first watch over their patient. "You should rest," her mother protested. "You've had quite a shock." "I'm fine," Catherine insisted. "I found him. I feel responsible." Her parents exchanged a look but didn't argue further. Catherine settled into a chair beside the bed, a lamp burning low on the bedside table. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes as clouds gathered, obscuring the stars. As the night deepened, Caleb's fever rose. Catherine bathed his face and chest with cool water, murmuring reassurances when he thrashed or called out in delirium. Sometimes he seemed to be arguing with someone, other times pleading. Once he clearly said, "I never meant for this to happen." In the quieter moments, Catherine studied him by lamplight. Even ill and injured, there was something compelling about Caleb Quinn. His hands were calloused like a working man's, but there was an educated quality to his speech, even in delirium. The contradiction intrigued her. Near dawn, his fever broke. Catherine had dozed off in her chair and woke to find Caleb watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert. "You're still here," he said, voice rough but stronger than the day before. "I said you weren't dying," she reminded him with a small smile. "I meant it." "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved my life." "Who shot you, Mr. Quinn?" He looked away. "It's complicated." Most things worth explaining usually are, Katherine replied, pouring a glass of water from the pitcher on the nightstand and helping him drink. Caleb took a few careful sips before answering. I was in a card game in a camp about 10 miles east of here. One of the players accused me of cheating. Were you? Katherine asked bluntly. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. No, madam, I don't need to cheat to win at cards. So he shot you? Not exactly. I left the game when things got heated. They followed me, 3 of them. I managed to get on my horse and ride, but one of them was a better shot than I'd given him credit for. Katherine frowned. You rode 10 miles with a bullet in you. Didn't realize how bad it was at first, Caleb admitted. Adrenaline, I suppose. By the time I knew I was in trouble, I was lost. My horse threw me when I passed out in the saddle. He glanced around the room. Where exactly am I? Miller Ranch, about 5 miles north of Durango. Durango, he repeated thoughtfully. I was heading there, heard they're building a railroad. They are, Katherine confirmed. The town's growing fast. She hesitated, then asked, What brings you to Durango? Other than cards, I mean. A guarded look crossed his face. Looking for work. I've done a bit of everything: cowhand, horse trainer, even some mining. Before Katherine could ask more questions, her mother appeared in the doorway with a tray of food. You're awake, Elena exclaimed, her face brightening with relief. That's a good sign. I've brought some broth and bread if you feel up to eating. As Elena fussed over Caleb, Katherine slipped out to wash up and change her clothes. When she returned to the kitchen, her father and brother were discussing the day's work over breakfast. How's our guest? James asked as Katherine joined them at the table. Better. Fever's down and he's talking sensibly. Did he say anything more about who shot him? Katherine shared what Caleb had told her, watching her father's expression grow troubled. Card game, eh? I don't like the sound of that. Man could be a gambler, maybe even an outlaw. Or just someone who enjoys an occasional game, Katherine countered. He says he was heading to Durango for work. Well, he's not going anywhere for a while, her father concluded. Not with that wound. We'll keep an eye on him, see what sort of man he is. Over the next few days, Caleb slowly regained his strength. Dr. Monroe visited twice more, pronouncing him on the mend but warning against any strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. Katherine found herself spending more time with their unexpected guest than was strictly necessary for his care. There was something about Caleb that drew her, in perhaps his easy smile that appeared more frequently as he healed, or the thoughtful way he listened when she talked about the ranch and her family. He was well educated, she discovered. He could quote Shakespeare and discuss politics with her father. He knew horses better than anyone she'd met, offering suggestions for breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang Daniel had been struggling with. A week after she'd found him bleeding in the pasture, Caleb was well enough to sit on the porch, watching the sunset with Katherine beside him. Your family has been very kind, he said, his voice stronger now. Not many would take in a stranger the way you have. We couldn't exactly leave you to die, Katherine replied with a wry smile. Besides, it's lonely out here sometimes. You've brought some excitement. Getting shot isn't my idea of providing entertainment, Caleb chuckled, then winced slightly at the movement. Still painful, less than before. He glanced at her, expression turning serious. I've been thinking about how to repay your family for your help. There's no need, there is, he insisted. I noticed your father and brother are short-handed with the cattle. Once I'm healed, I could work for a while, help out around the ranch. Katherine studied him. Is that what you really want, to be a ranch hand? Caleb looked out over the valley, now painted in purple and gold by the setting sun. I've been drifting a long time, Miss Miller. Maybe it's time I stayed put for a while. There was something in his voice, a weariness, a longing that touched Katherine deeply. I think my father would appreciate the help, she said softly. And please call me Catherine. After all, I've seen you at your worst. His smile reached his eyes this time. Catherine, then, and you must call me Caleb. The next morning, Catherine found her father in the barn examining a broken wagon wheel. Pa, Caleb has offered to work for us once he's recovered, she said, helping him lift the wheel, to repay us for taking him in. James considered this, wiping his hands on a rag. Did he now? And what do you think of that idea? Catherine tried to keep her voice neutral. I think he knows horses well, and with the new calves coming soon, we could use another hand. Her father gave her a knowing look. And it has nothing to do with the way you light up whenever you're around him. Heat rushed to Catherine's cheeks. I don't. That's not. James laughed, patting her shoulder. You're 23, Katie. I'm not blind, and neither is your mother. We've seen how you look at him. I'm just concerned for his recovery, she protested weakly. Of course you are, her father agreed, not sounding convinced at all. Well, tell Mr. Quinn I'll take him on, provided Dr. Monroe says he's fit for work. But, he added, his expression growing serious, I want to know more about him first. A man with his education doesn't usually drift from town to town playing cards unless he's running from something. Catherine couldn't argue with that. Despite the time they'd spent together, Caleb remained vague about his past. She knew he'd grown up in Missouri, that he'd been on his own since he was 18, and that he was now 28 years old. But the decade in between remained largely a mystery. That afternoon, as Catherine helped Caleb walk around the yard for exercise, she decided to be direct. My father says you can stay on and work once you're well, she told him, supporting his arm as they moved slowly along the garden path. That's good of him, Caleb replied, his steps becoming steadier with each day. He also says he wants to know more about you, Catherine added, watching his expression carefully. So do I. Caleb was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he might not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. What do you want to know? Why you're really here? Why you've been drifting all these years? What you're running from? He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. You think I'm running from something, aren't you? The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. Slowly, he nodded. Yes, but not what you might think. He glanced toward the house, then back to her. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Catherine led him to a bench beneath an old apple tree near the edge of the garden. As they sat, a cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead, a welcome relief from the summer heat. I was a lawyer once, Caleb began, surprising her. In St. Louis. My father was a judge and I followed in his footsteps, at least as far as the law was concerned. I was good at it too, had a promising career ahead of me. What happened? I fell in love, he said simply. With the daughter of my father's colleague, Caroline Harrison. We were to be married. The way he said the woman's name with a mixture of tenderness and pain made Catherine's heart twist unexpectedly. She died, Caleb continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Typhoid fever. 3 weeks before our wedding. I'm sorry, Catherine said softly, understanding loss all too well. Her older sister had died in childbirth 4 years earlier, leaving a wound that still hadn't fully healed. After that, I couldn't stay in St. Louis. Too many memories. So I left, thinking I'd find somewhere new to practice law, but the farther west I went, the less I wanted to return to that life. So you became a drifter instead, Caleb smiled faintly. Not exactly how I'd put it, but yes. I've worked ranches in Kansas, mines in Nevada, even drove cattle up from Texas once. I've been looking for something, a place that feels right. And the card games, a skill I learned in school, it's an easy way to make money when work is scarce. He met her gaze directly. I don't cheat, Catherine, never have. But I'm good at reading people, knowing when they're bluffing. It's what made me a good lawyer, too." She believed him, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps it was the steady way he held her gaze, or the fact that nothing in his story seemed designed to impress or mislead. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "My father will appreciate your honesty." "I didn't tell you for your father's sake," Caleb replied quietly. "I told you because—" He hesitated, then seemed to choose his words carefully. "Because I'd like you to know who I am, the good and the bad." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Katherine felt her pulse quicken. She'd had suitors before the son of a neighboring rancher, a shopkeeper from town, but none had affected her the way Caleb did, with his quiet intensity and unexpected vulnerability. "I should get back to the house," she said, suddenly needing space to think. "My mother will be wondering where we've gone." As they walked back, Caleb moving more slowly than before, Katherine was acutely aware of his presence beside her. What was she doing? Developing feelings for a man she'd known barely a week. A man who, by his own admission, had spent years drifting from place to place. Yet there was something undeniably right about the way she felt when she was with him. As if a part of her that had been dormant was finally awakening. Later that evening, Katherine related Caleb's story to her parents as they sat around the kitchen table after dinner. Daniel had gone to town for supplies and wouldn't return until morning. "A lawyer," her father mused, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "That explains the education. And the grief explains the wandering, I suppose." "Do you believe him?" Eleanor asked, her practical nature always seeking the truth. "I do," Katherine answered without hesitation. "So do I," James decided after a moment. A man making up a story would claim something more impressive than losing his way after his fiancée died. That has the ring of truth to it. Relief flooded through Katherine. Her father's approval meant a great deal, especially when it came to Caleb staying on at the ranch. The following morning, Dr. Monroe made what he declared would be his final visit to check on Caleb's progress. "The wound has healed remarkably well," he announced after examining Caleb. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Quinn. An inch to the right, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Not luck, Doctor," Caleb replied, glancing at Katherine, who stood nearby. "Good care and better company." The doctor followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "Yes, well, the Millers are known for their hospitality. As for work, you can start with light duties in a few days, provided you don't overexert yourself. No heavy lifting for another week at least." After the doctor left, Caleb found James in the barn and formally offered his services. "I appreciate that, Quinn," James said, shaking Caleb's hand. "We'll start you with the horses. Katherine says you have a way with them." "I've always understood horses better than people," Caleb admitted. "Less complicated," James laughed. "You haven't met my wife's mare. That animal has more opinions than the town council." The next few weeks established a new rhythm at the Miller ranch. Caleb proved to be as skilled with horses as he'd claimed, gentling even the most stubborn colts with a patience that impressed James and Daniel. He worked from sunrise to sunset, taking only brief rests when his healing wound demanded it. Katherine found herself watching him whenever she could, admiring the easy way he moved among the animals, the quiet authority in his voice when he gave instructions to Daniel about training techniques. There was a grace to him that belied his strength, a gentleness that contrasted with the hardness life had carved into him. One evening in late August, Katherine was gathering eggs from the hen house when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She stepped out to see 3 riders coming up the path to the ranch house. Something in their posture, the way they sat their horses, hands never far from their holsters, sent a chill down her spine. She hurried toward the house, nearly colliding with Caleb, who had also spotted the visitors. "Get inside," he said quietly, his expression grim. "Tell your father we have company." "Who are they?" "I think they might be the men who shot me," Caleb replied, his hand instinctively going to his side where the wound had finally healed into a puckered scar. Fear and anger warred within Katherine. "Then you should be the one inside. I'll get Pa and Daniel." "There's no time," Caleb said as the riders drew closer. "Just stay behind me, please." The three men reined in their horses in the yard. They were a rough-looking lot, unshaven, dust-covered, with cold eyes that took in the ranch with calculating stares. The leader, a tall man with a scar running along his jawline, spotted Caleb and smiled thinly. "Well, look who's still breathing," he drawled. "Thought we'd left you for the buzzards, Quinn." "Sorry to disappoint you, Rawlins," Caleb replied evenly. "What do you want?" "What's rightfully mine," Rawlins said, dismounting. His companions remained on their horses, hands resting casually on their gun belts. "You cheated me out of $500, and I aim to collect." "I didn't cheat," Caleb stated firmly. "You lost fair and square." Katherine felt her heart pounding as she edged toward the house, hoping to alert her father without drawing attention. But Rawlins noticed the movement and turned his cold gaze on her. "Who's this pretty little thing?" "Your woman, Quinn," he smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Maybe we'll take her as interest on what you owe." Caleb's posture changed instantly, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "You won't touch her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The tension was broken by the sound of a shotgun being cocked. James Miller stood on the porch, the weapon aimed steadily at Rawlins. "This is private property," James declared. "State your business or ride on." Rawlins eyed the shotgun, clearly reassessing the situation. "This man owes me money," he said, jerking his head toward Caleb. "Cheated me in a card game and ran." "That's not how I hear it," James replied. "Sounds to me like you're poor losers who shot an unarmed man in the back." "Wasn't in the back," one of the mounted men muttered, earning a glare from Rawlins. "I don't care where you shot him," James continued. "The fact is, you did. That's attempted murder in these parts. The sheriff in Durango would be mighty interested to hear about it." Rawlins spat on the ground. "Ain't no witnesses except Quinn, his word against ours." "And mine," Katherine spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt. "I found him bleeding, saw the wound. Whoever shot him meant to kill him." Daniel appeared from around the side of the barn, rifle in hand. The odds had shifted clearly against Rawlins and his men, and they knew it. "This ain't over, Quinn," Rawlins growled, mounting his horse again. "I'll be waiting in town when you decide to show your face." "I wouldn't advise that," James said coldly. "Sheriff Carlton is a friend of mine. He'll be keeping an eye out for trouble." With a final menacing glare, Rawlins wheeled his horse around, and the three men rode off, dust billowing behind them. Katherine released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. James lowered the shotgun, turning to Caleb. "You think they'll be back?" Caleb watched the retreating figures with a troubled expression. "Not here. Rawlins isn't stupid enough to take on an armed family, but he meant what he said about waiting for me in town." "Then you stay clear of town for a while," James decided. "Gives me time to have a word with Carlton." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the mood was subdued. The confrontation had reminded them all of the dangers that still existed in the West, despite the veneer of civilization that was spreading with the railroad. "I should leave," Caleb said suddenly, setting down his fork. "I've brought trouble to your door. That's not right after all you've done for me." "Nonsense," Eleanor said firmly. "Those men were the trouble, not you." "Besides," Daniel added, "we need you for the fall roundup. Pa already told the Johnsons we'd have enough hands this year." Katherine remained silent, her heart constricting at the thought of Caleb leaving. These past weeks had only deepened her feelings for him, and she suspected hoped that he felt something for her as well, though neither had spoken of it. After dinner, Katherine found Caleb on the porch staring out at the darkening landscape. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You're not really thinking of leaving, are you?" she asked softly. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I should. Men like Rollins don't give up easily. And men like you shouldn't run from bullies," Katherine countered. "This could be your home, Caleb, if you want it to be." He turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Is that what you want, for me to stay?" Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment, she realized, when everything could change. Taking a deep breath, she answered truthfully, "Yes, I want you to stay." The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken words. Slowly, as if afraid she might pull away, Caleb reached out and took her hand in his. "I've been drifting for so long," he said quietly. "Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never letting myself get close to anyone after Caroline. But being here with you and your family. It feels like I've finally found what I've been searching for." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. "And what's that?" "A place where I belong," he said simply. "A reason to stop running." With gentle fingers, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending warmth cascading through her. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Miller. I know it hasn't been long and I have nothing to offer except myself." But Katherine silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. "Time doesn't matter," she whispered. "Not when it's right. And this feels right, doesn't it?" Instead of answering with words, Caleb leaned forward and kissed her softly. The touch of his lips was like coming home after a long journey, familiar somehow, though they had never kissed before. Katherine's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss, her heart soaring. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to your father," he murmured. Katherine smiled, feeling happier than she had in years. "He already knows. I think he knew before we did." The next morning, Caleb found James in the stables and formally asked permission to court Katherine. James regarded the younger man thoughtfully before extending his hand. "You've proven yourself a hard worker and an honorable man," he said as they shook hands. "But understand this, my daughter deserves someone who will stay by her side through whatever comes. This isn't an easy life, Quinn. Ranching takes grit and determination, especially out here." "I understand, sir," Caleb replied solemnly. "I've spent too many years running. I'm ready to stand my ground." James nodded, satisfied. "Then you have my blessing. But," he added with a hint of sternness, "we still have the matter of those men who came looking for you. That needs to be resolved before I'll consider anything more permanent between you and Katherine." "I agree completely," Caleb said. "Which is why I'd like to ride into Durango tomorrow and speak with Sheriff Carlton. This can't hang over our heads indefinitely." After some discussion, it was decided that Caleb wouldn't go alone. James and Daniel would accompany him, making it clear to Rollins and his companions that Caleb had the Miller family's full support. Katherine objected strenuously to being left behind, but her father was adamant. "This is men's business, Katie," he insisted, using her childhood nickname. "Besides, your mother needs your help with the preserving." Though she understood the reasoning, Katherine couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over her as she watched the three men ride out the next morning. Caleb caught her eye just before they disappeared from view, giving her a reassuring smile that did little to calm her fears. The day stretched endlessly as Katherine helped her mother can the last of the summer vegetables. Every distant sound made her heart jump, thinking the men had returned. By late afternoon, her nerves were frayed to the breaking point. "They'll be fine," Alina soothed, noting her daughter's distraction. "Your father and Daniel know how to handle themselves, and so does Caleb." I know, Katherine sighed. I just wish I knew what was happening. What was happening at that very moment was a tense confrontation in the sheriff's office in Durango. Sheriff Carlton, a barrel-chested man with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully as James and Caleb explained the situation. Rawlins, you say? The sheriff frowned. I know that name. Had some trouble with him over in Silverton last year, suspected of robbing a mining payroll, but nothing could be proved. He and his men shot Caleb and left him for dead, James stated bluntly. And yesterday they threatened my family. Carlton's expression hardened. That I won't abide. Threatening peaceful ranchers is where I draw the line. They're probably at the saloon, Caleb suggested. Rawlins likes to drink when he's planning something. The sheriff stood, checking his gun before holstering it. Let's pay them a visit then. The Silver Dollar Saloon was crowded despite the early hour. Cowboys, miners, and railroad workers filled the tables, while a piano player thumped out a lively tune in the corner. Rawlins and his two companions were easy to spot, hunched over a table near the back, bottles of whiskey before them. The room quieted as Sheriff Carlton entered, followed by Caleb, James, and Daniel. Rawlins looked up, his expression darkening when he spotted Caleb. Well, he drawled, alcohol slurring his words slightly. Look who decided to show his face after all. Mr. Rawlins, Sheriff Carlton said formally, I understand you've been making threats against this man and the Miller family. Rawlins sneered. Just collecting a debt, Sheriff. Quinn here cheated me at cards. I've known James Miller for 15 years, Carlton replied evenly. If he vouches for Quinn, that's good enough for me. Besides, shooting a man over a card game is a hanging offense whether he cheated or not. You can't prove I shot anyone, Rawlins said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe not, Carlton conceded. But I can run you in for threatening the Millers on their own property. And I can send telegrams to every sheriff between here and the New Mexico border, asking about a man of your description. I wonder what I'd learn. The threat hung in the air. Rawlins glanced at his companions, who were looking increasingly uncomfortable. Now, Carlton continued, I'm giving you a choice. You can leave Durango today and never come back, or you can spend the next 6 months in my jail while I investigate every unsolved crime in the territory. For a tense moment, it seemed Rawlins might choose to fight. His hand twitched toward his gun and Caleb braced himself for violence, but the fight seemed to drain out of the man suddenly. Fine, Rawlins muttered. Ain't worth the trouble anyway. He glared at Caleb. You got lucky, Quinn. Again. It wasn't luck, Caleb replied quietly. It was finding people worth standing with. Under Sheriff Carlton's watchful eye, Rawlins and his men finished their drinks, paid their tab, and left the saloon. The sheriff followed them to the edge of town, making sure they headed east, away from Durango and the Miller Ranch. As Caleb, James, and Daniel prepared to return home, Carlton shook Caleb's hand. Miller tells me you were a lawyer back east, he said. Durango could use a man with legal training. Town's growing fast, and Judge Wilson is getting on in years. Just something to consider. The idea took root in Caleb's mind as they rode back to the ranch. He hadn't practiced law in years, but the knowledge was still there. Perhaps it was time to use his education again, to build something lasting instead of drifting from place to place. When they arrived home, Katherine rushed out to meet them, relief washing over her face. You're back. Is everything all right? What happened? Caleb dismounted, going to her immediately. Everything's fine, he assured her, taking both her hands in his. Rawlins and his men have left Durango for good. Sheriff Carlton made sure of it. That night, as the family celebrated their victory with a special dinner, Caleb shared Carlton's suggestion about practicing law in Durango. It's been a long time, he admitted. I'd need to study up on territorial law, but it might be a good way to contribute to the community. You could keep working with us part-time, James offered, at least until you get established. I think it's a wonderful idea, Katherine said, her eyes shining. You'd be using your education helping people. Looking around the table at the Millers, these people who had taken him in as one of their own, Caleb felt a certainty he hadn't experienced in years. This was where he belonged, with them. With Katherine. As summer gave way to fall, Caleb split his time between the ranch and town. Judge Wilson, delighted to find someone with formal legal training, took Caleb under his wing, helping him navigate the specific requirements of territorial law. By October, Caleb had taken on his first case, helping a widowed miner secure title to his claim against a large mining company trying to force him out. His relationship with Katherine deepened with each passing day. They rode together on her days off from ranch work, exploring the beautiful country around Durango. Sometimes they picnicked by the river, talking for hours about their hopes and dreams. Other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them, the kind that comes only when two people are truly at ease with one another. On a crisp November afternoon, Caleb took Katherine to a secluded spot overlooking the valley. The aspens had lost their golden leaves, but the view was still breathtaking, the snow-capped mountains in the distance, the river winding like a silver ribbon through the landscape. "I brought you here for a reason," Caleb said, taking her hands in his. "I've been saving up from my legal work and helping your father. It's not much yet, but I've purchased land just outside town. There's a small cabin already built and room to expand." Katherine's eyes widened. "Your own place, our own place," he corrected softly, "if you'll have me." From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring. "Katherine Miller, I've loved you since the moment you found me bleeding in that pasture and told me I wasn't dying that day. You gave me back my life in more ways than one. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Katherine's eyes as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Caleb Quinn, I will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly. As Caleb gathered her into his arms, kissing her with all the love in his heart, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that finding him that summer day had been no accident but destiny. Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the small church in Durango. The town had embraced Caleb as one of their own, impressed by his integrity and legal acumen. The church was filled with well-wishers, neighboring ranchers, shopkeepers, and even Judge Wilson, who had agreed to officiate. Katherine wore a dress of ivory silk that her mother and she had sewn together, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned Alina's own wedding gown. Caleb, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, watched with wonder as James escorted his daughter down the aisle. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish one another for all their days, Katherine thought of how far they had come since that July afternoon when she'd found Caleb bleeding in the pasture. From strangers to lovers to husband and wife, a journey that had changed both their lives forever. The cabin Caleb had purchased became their home, though they spent many evenings at the Miller Ranch, helping with chores and enjoying family dinners. Caleb's law practice grew steadily, his reputation for fairness and diligence spreading throughout the county. By spring, he had enough work to open a proper office in town, with a sign outside reading Caleb Quinn, attorney at law. Katherine divided her time between helping at the ranch and creating a home with Caleb. She planted a garden behind their cabin, and Caleb built shelves for the books they both loved to read in the evenings by lamplight. It was a simple life but a deeply satisfying one, filled with purpose and love. In May of 1880, Nearly a year after Katherine had found Caleb bleeding in the pasture, they received news that the railroad would be completed by summer's end. Durango was booming, new businesses opening every week as people flocked to the area. "It won't be the same," Katherine remarked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Once the railroad comes." "Change is inevitable," Caleb replied, his arm around her shoulders, "but some things remain constant." She leaned into his embrace, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Like what?" "Like this," he said softly, kissing the top of her head. "Like us." 2 years later, on a warm June morning, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named James Caleb Quinn, in honor of her father and his. As Caleb held his newborn son, gazing down at the tiny face that somehow combined features from both of them, he felt a sense of completion. "He's perfect," he whispered, sitting beside Katherine on their bed, "just like his mother." Katherine smiled tiredly, reaching out to touch her son's small hand. "I think he has your eyes." "Poor child," Caleb joked, making her laugh despite her exhaustion. As their son grew, so did Durango and Caleb's practice. By 1885, he was considered one of the most respected attorneys in southwestern Colorado, often traveling to nearby towns to represent clients in important cases. Katherine had given birth to a second child, by then a daughter named Alina Rose, with her mother's spirit and her father's quick mind. Life wasn't always easy. There were harsh winters when snow isolated them for weeks, summers of drought that threatened the ranch, and occasional illness that reminded them of life's fragility. But through it all, Katherine and Caleb faced every challenge together, their love only deepening with each passing year. On the 10th anniversary of the day Katherine had found Caleb wounded in the pasture, they rode out to the spot together. Their children were spending the day with their grandparents, giving Katherine and Caleb a rare day alone. The pasture looked much the same, though the ranch had expanded over the years, with more fencing and additional outbuildings visible in the distance. They dismounted near where Caleb had fallen that fateful day, spreading a blanket on the grass for a picnic. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Katherine asked as they sat side by side, looking out over the land they both loved. "If I'd taken another route home that day, or if you'd fallen somewhere else?" Caleb took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band he'd placed there a decade ago. "Sometimes, but then I remember what my father used to say, that nothing truly important happens by accident. So you think we were meant to find each other?" There was a teasing note in her voice, but curiosity too. "I think," Caleb said thoughtfully, "that I spent years wandering, looking for something I couldn't name, and you spent years here building a life but perhaps waiting for something too. And yes, I believe we were meant to find each other, exactly when and how we did." Katherine leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "You know what I remember most about that day? Not the blood or the fear, but the moment you opened your eyes and looked at me. Something happened then, though I couldn't have named it at the time. I thought you were an angel," Caleb admitted with a smile, "come to escort me to the hereafter. Instead, I just escorted you to my parents' house and put you to work," Katherine laughed. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Caleb said, his voice growing serious again. "You saying you're not dying today might have saved my life, but loving you is what gave me something to live for." As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the valley in gold and crimson, Katherine and Caleb gathered their picnic things and mounted their horses for the ride home. Their children would be waiting, eager to hear stories about when their parents were younger, before they were even born. Looking at Caleb riding beside her, his profile silhouetted against the sunset, Katherine felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. for the wounded cowboy in the pasture who had become the center of her world, for the life they had built together, day by day, year by year, for the love that had begun with a chance encounter and grown into something enduring and true. "Race you home," Caleb called with a boyish grin that made him look as young as the day they'd met. Katherine laughed, already urging her horse forward. "You're on, Quinn." As they galloped across the pasture, the wind in their hair and joy in their hearts, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that finding Caleb bleeding in the grass that summer day had been the first day of the rest of her life, a life richer and more fulfilling than she could ever have imagined. Behind them, the setting sun cast long shadows across the spot where their story had begun, where a wounded cowboy had lain bleeding in the pasture until a determined young woman had found him and declared, with all the conviction in her heart, "You're not dying today." She had been right. He hadn't died that day. Instead, they had both begun to truly live.